how can the church teach that? How can it be a grave sin to deliberately miss Mass? And also, if it's so important for us to go to Mass every single Sunday, what about being dispensed from it or excused from it? If it's so important, how can we be excused or dispensed from the Sunday obligation under certain conditions? What are those conditions? And one reason this is an important question is because in the spring of the year 2020, as you all know, right, the coronavirus pandemic broke out and something unprecedented happened in the whole history of the church. The Vatican in Rome and then Catholic bishops throughout the world lifted the obligation to attend Sunday Mass, right, so that people did not have to go to the Eucharist because of what was taking place with the coronavirus, right? And
so I want everybody to catch what he just said there. Because of the coronavirus, the Catholic Church lifted the obligation to excuse a grave sin. Now, why did the Catholic Church do that? Well, because of the government, because of the state government. The world governments effectively banned going to church. And instead of telling a billion people that are Catholic, you better still go to church anyways, which they could do. They could have a 1 billion person army rise up, go to church anyways. They obviously capitulated to the state. So we now know that the state power has secular jurisdiction to effectively curtail your religious conviction. Think about that for a second. If you have freedom of religion, as we all do in the United States, we should be able to attend church services effectively whenever in a reasonable fashion. And the tradition is mostly on Sunday. But because of the world government shutting everything down, the Vatican has claimed that it's excusing everybody of this grave sin. Now, there's multiple things on this, because remember, a grave sin is murder. That's a grave sin. And so the Vatican is deciding, murder's okay. That's what a grave sin is. A grave sin is using God's name in vain. Now, to be more clear, scripturally, using God's name in vain is bearing his name improperly. So you're bearing his name improperly. That would be a grave sin. And so these things that are a grave sin, traditionally in the Old Testament, you would be put to death. And so that's why it's considered a grave sin. Now, what's really important to understand about this, the institution effectively capitulated to the state, showing that the state has ultimate authority over religious matters. And the reason why this is important is because someday we could see if the church and the state combine, and the state already has secular exceptions to override all religion, then effectively one denomination can take control of secular power. All right, so let's keep going.
Because of the dangers that it posed to their flocks in different countries throughout the world. Now, this had never happened before. I'll never forget when I saw the news that the Vatican wasn't going to have Easter services for Holy Week, right? This is an unprecedented event. And it raised a question for a lot of people. Hold on, how can the Pope or the bishops, how do they have the authority to lift the obligation for Sunday Mass when it's so important. I've been taught my whole life I have to go to Mass every Sunday, right? So, in our current context, now that we're in 2021, a number of bishops throughout the country and throughout the world are beginning to reinstate that Sunday obligation. And so this raises a really important pastoral question for Christians everywhere, for Catholics. Why do we have the Sunday obligation? Where does it come from? And why is it important to our lives of faith? That's what we're going to look at in this presentation. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at three key topics. First, we're going to look at Sabbath rest in the Old Testament. I love the Old Testament, so we've got to go back to the beginnings of the Bible to really understand it. Second, we're going to look at Sunday worship in the New Testament and how the early church celebrated the Lord's Supper, or the Eucharist, as it was later called. And then third and finally, we're going to end with the Sunday obligation today. What does the church teach today about the Sunday obligation, and how can we live that out in our lives of faith as Catholics? All right? So that's the basic plan for this presentation.